Yes,
Hello.
welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
We've always seen battles on mindsets. But first, Yaz, I would like you to introduce to my audience.
My name is Yaz Yazicioglu. I'm American born, raised, moved to Turkey about 20 years ago. Primarily, I deal with consumer psychology. Well, that's what my education is, consumer psychology. Also, I'm an engineer from the Air Force, and specifically aeronautics engineer. Completely sidetracked, but the two put together gave me a very good ergonomic and consumer behavior mentality. And I try to utilize that to best fit brands and the upcoming age and consumer mentalities.
So what do you currently do? Are you working with Turkish Brands?
Currently, I'm not specifically working for any big companies. I'm doing more training and I'm doing more consulting on new paradigms, upcoming new age technology especially.
The Turkish market is huge. A lot of European brands manufacture here. There's a lot of Turkish brands also that manufacture. And there's a lot of Turkish brands in the Middle East and some part of Europe. Where's the challenge here that you see in organizations still see the old mindset back in the 60s and 50s, the trade mindset? How do you work with such mindsets?
You know just as well as I do, Saeed, that there's an international or kind of universal accepted understanding of brand and what it should signify, how it should be presented, etc. But most importantly, I think it's the manner in which the people in Turkey who are establishing the brands, the marketing people, the owners and so forth, you have to kind of look at how they were raised and how they were understanding of brands to first get an understanding of why they present the way they do. And I think that really depends upon following. I think the Turkish society in general has never really been a value-add vertical society. They produce and disseminate and so forth, so it's never really been to a commodity, etc. And branding. When you see that they've come from a different mindset that is take something already existing and just make it more. I'd say over the last 10 years is it just really settled in what America's kind of had gone through about 30 years ago. And moving outside of the country is a different source because they're looking at it from a perspective, like Turkish Airlines is a great example. Turkish Airlines has been now, last 10 years, great example in setting its pace in around country as an airline. But in order to get to that mindset, they had to shift. I guess the best thing is spending money on values that they were not used to before. If you look in here in Turkey, if you've noticed, it's a lot of outdoor advertisement. So that leaves a lot of impression to be spent on a different way of connecting with the consumer. Television as well, very big. It's yet to come into brand alignment with identity, with character, personality. What we see in more developed countries is brands are more or less taken in, adopted, or accepted by the way they identify with the individual and what they represent. Here it's shifting, and it's more like if the brand spends a lot of money, then it must be good, so I'll go ahead and accept it. And it's not so much personality and character that really kick.
Yes, you've worked with organizations here, and here's a hard question. Do you believe so-called brands or claim to be brands are brands in Turkey, or you still battle that?
Turkey has brands, it's established brands. Like I said, one of them, Turkish Airlines, yes. Mavi jeans is a good one that went exported. Simit Saray, which is an interesting one that kind of sent its propagation abroad. And then of course you have the classic Turkish cultural icons, Turkish coffee, etc. But I don't think any of them have ever really coalesced to come together to form a single identity of what that would be. Mavi doesn't really take that identity, it takes a different one. Turkish Airlines maybe did, but lately it's also been kind of pulling back in that same sense. You have to first fully submerge yourself in your own culture, see what the aspects of your culture are in demand can be exported, and then stand behind them, coalesce them, bring them together to be unified. That's the only way you can actually make a solid brand in the country outward, exporting-wise. Internal-wise, there's a lot of brands, but what they represent and how they're presented, like one of the most common things I love in Turkey is that anybody can open up a place and say, famous so-and-so.
Yeah.
According to what? According to who? Why? And just
and the
because
same applies in the Middle East also.
Sure, and just because as it says famous, is the customer level of awareness so that he automatically just accepts that? I don't think that Turkey has an educated consumer base, so that if you can't have a very prominent educated consumer base, you can't adapt brands from that consumer base because you're always refeeding and regurgitating stuff to them.
But again, what does first mean and what does famous mean? And how does that deliver the brand as a perception? Okay, your first is short-lived, but what's then? What are the values? What are the values delivering? Now, my question would be, how do you see Turkish brands in the next 5 to 7 years?
Well, it's really interesting you should say that because, this next 5-7 years is a dramatic difference from previous 5 to 7 years if you want to look about it. And the biggest one of that is technology. You're looking at disruptive technologies, exponentially increasing technologies coming on. In the next 3 years, we're looking at having 8 billion people online, the biggest worldwide marketplace for human beings ever. In the last 20 months, there have been more innovations and discoveries than there have been in the total of human history. If Turkish general brands don't open up to this, they're just going to get, really far behind, and they're not going to find the constituents, the brand people, to be able to identify with them eventually.
What holds back the evolution, change? Is it culture or is it what? What is it that holds back, that slows the whole process?
My personal feeling, I think it's inferiority complex.
Can you explain that? Elaborate, please.
I think it's kind of because they feel as though they're not to mark with certain other things, so fake it till you make it kind of approach. And in that, it's just throw everything in the kitchen sink at it, usually being money, which again, I reinforced by the amount of outdoor advertising and in-your-face advertising, media advertising, public advertising in that sense, which makes an impact. And so if it makes an impact, why not keep doing it? But you're never educating the consumer to take higher values, higher appreciation of product, loyalty, service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's always on a paradigm of who makes the biggest bang. Disruptive technologies brings the cost of demand down. You can have anybody now off the street become a brand, reach people from all around the world, increase their sales, et cetera, and have nothing to do with being Turkish, but they're in Turkey. I think if corporations or companies here that are big brands, long-lasting adventure, have to change a complete shift way of management, way of looking at things, they have to try to tackle values more than it is just impression through outdoor seeing or being advertised.
Yes.
But what are the values that you're putting out there with that?
I think it's more of a tradition than anything else, that I have to be there, I have to be there, I have to be there.
Sure, it is. The consumer education in Turkey has to go through an evolution, and unfortunately it's not going to have time to do that because of what's happening around the world. China, everybody, the influx of products. How is a consumer who's come from scarcity mentality, start changing your mindset to an abundancy mentality and starting to say that I will take this brand not because it spends so much money on advertising, but because it best aligns with my core values.
Yes.
And that's the engagement of your people and so forth. That's being done very little.
Which sector is very promising in the next 5 years here in Turkey?
Well, one sector that always is promising and it should never really go down is, I think, tourism, food and hospitality specifically. Airbnb has had a huge impact, obviously, because of the hotels and all around the world, but especially here. Booking.com was closed for whatever governmental reasons, so that whole industry of hotels has been struggling. But tourism is a huge industry for Turkey, so if they have to reinvest, turn those engines to try to maximize that area. Textile has always been a classic industry, but again, Mavi, there's very few have already rise that value chain to get to. We're one of the biggest producers of olive oil. Why can't we make our own famous brand? And we sell all of our olive oil to Italy. They just put a label on, make a story, and they take all the credit for it.
You have Greece and Spain and Italy, not Turkey.
I'm getting it and I'm selling it. That's what was expected. Well, the new age is not just getting and accepting, but putting a story behind it, putting a reason, a value, aligning it with your customer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
What shocks me is the repetition, the redundancy of the look and feel of all the locals. So there's no uniqueness. Is it a culture?
I think it's a culture. I honestly do. I think it's something to do with the Joneses, keeping up with the Joneses. But we've seen so much now, and for example, in America, that pushes away the mass appeal they go behind the scenes. They want to see what's the value there. Here it's still mainly aesthetic. I mean, I give them a lot of credit. They're very adaptive, they're very quick on their feet, they can quickly change to situations, which is great, but at the same time, it's not a very cost-effective way of doing it. Having really been able to establish what and who you are and having pride behind what you're doing is never going to be able to get you to stand out among everybody else and say, hey, this is the way I do it. I'm not trying to grab the whole market and capital and everything, That diversity is needed.
Then we have another battle. Too much data and little insight.
Oh, I mean, believe me, I know that one very well.
So there's too much data, and yes, we became a data sheep.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. Metrics is very important for measuring and seeing where they're going. I've always laughed at data because it can be interpreted in so many different ways. And I can present data to you in one way where it makes your business look like you're just absolutely failing, and another way I can give you hope and inspiration with the same data.
If you're a chief executive officer, head of marketing, and you receive the data, and based on that data are all your moves, what would be the result? Same result that the competitor is doing.
Technology is ever increasing. It's doubling every year. Cost of demand to reach your end consumer through the internet is dropping. And it's not stopping. I mean, we're never coming to see the precipice of okay, we can level off. 2005, you expect to have 8 billion people online through a worldwide network. It's huge, the biggest human marketplace in human history. And at that point, if you don't have the structure internally, if you don't have the mindset of how to interpret or act on data in that manner, you'll be completely misled based on your perception.
Recently, you joined a think tank on brand called the Core Code. your idea of how you see the core code and where it's going.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I think the biggest value that we could give together on the core code is transparency. Transparency is having every part of your organization connected, not on a need to know basis, on a level where every one of those people can feel responsible for something that they have in their own skill set to contribute. And at that point, get them to see things as their consumer hat is put on rather than their CEO hat and marketing hat. Because that's the biggest challenge. I think another aspect of that, what we would do as a core code, and in this region, as you said, more so even in this culture, is to be able to give a little bit of level transparency to the top management, because I think they're so used to a method of working where everything is just automated on a certain expectation.
Yes.
Whereas everyone else kind of comes in there and talks to them like, oh, they're somebody important. Let me just say yes, or let me just say this.
Yeah, they're kind of yes all the time, yes. And Yaz, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Having Yaz and people like Yaz on this platform, it's inspiring for me, but also inspiring for my viewers, because we seek to provide knowledge all the time on brand, and brand has been misled for so long.